Hello, viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today, I'm pleased to present another installment in my series of Community Spotlight videos in which I interview various prominent and upstanding members of the Conquest LCG community. Specifically, we discuss their favorite decks and how best to play their favorite warlords. Hopefully, through sharing their personal experience, opinions, and advice, they'll be able to provide you with a host of information useful to both new and veteran players alike. Be sure to let me know what you think of this interview in the comments below, and as always, I'm always open to constructive criticism. But, with our introduction aside, let's get things started with a discussion of Eldorath Starbane. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, but before we delve into some in-depth discussion about craft worlds and webways, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the people at home? Where do we know you from, and how do you contribute to the Conquest community at large?
Well, hello there. I'm John Gobeil. I'm an admin on a few of the Conquest groups on Facebook, and I'm partially in charge of the Toronto Conquest community, trying to grow that as much as I can. I run a league there and that sort of thing, and that's about it for me. I just love Conquest.
Awesome. I guess, how long have you been playing the game, and how did you get into it in the first place?
Well, I haven't played card games much since like back in the 90s when I played Overpower. But for some reason, just recently, my young kids got old enough and decided that I might have some time to get back into something. And I was trying out Dice Masters and really didn't like the business model. And then I saw an announcement from Fantasy Flight Games saying that a new LCG was coming out, and I really enjoyed watching Netrunner videos and that sort of thing, but was completely intimidated by having to buy like 27 expansions.
Sure.
So I took it as a sign, and I hopped in when it was released, and I've been enjoying it ever since.
Awesome. Well, just in doing these community spotlights, I've been having people come on and talk about their favorite warlords, kind of some of the highlights, some of the lowlights, their strengths and weaknesses, and which warlord struck you as kind of one of your personal favorites. Which one of you found to be particularly appealing?
Well, my favorite warlord is definitely Eldorath Starbane. I don't know if it's the play style or the art style or the fact that I win tournaments with him or what, but all those come together really nicely for me with him, so I'll take it.
Well, what is it that maybe makes you pick Eldorath now that we've seen Baharoth or Baharoth? What's the appeal there? Why not switch over to the new option?
Well, for me, it's a combination of two things mostly that I think makes Eldorath superior to Baharoth. One is his reaction, which is just ridiculously good, because you build a command strong, a command heavy deck, and he just complements it really well. And the other thing also about the reaction is that, it's an answer to a lot of your problems in the combat phase, and it also affects the command phase. So it's one of the only warlord abilities that can influence both. The other thing is that it synergizes really well with Starbane's Council, and those guys are just beasts.
Sure. I definitely like the fact that there's no restriction to it can affect elite units, it can affect unique units. It's definitely got applications in multiple phases like you were talking about, but what do you think some of Eldorath's other strengths are, apart from just that built-in reaction?
Well, I think that one of the trickiest parts about playing against Eldorath, and this is one of his strengths for me, is that he's one of the warlords that by the time he has gotten to the combat, he's already pretty much done everything that makes him a threat. And so, as much as you want to bloody him to get rid of his ability, in combat, if you're looking at winning a planet, he's not really helping that much. So it's a lot more likely that you're going to want to try to take out, a Wild Rider squadron or a Yendon Wraith Guard with their 4 armor bane versus Mr. I attack you for 1.
So, I guess oftentimes, do you ever find your opponents wasting attacks? Like he just kind of serves to be a relatively hardy body on the table, sponging up enemy fire?
I think that closer to the core, yes, but I find that 7 hit points doesn't go very far nowadays. I mean, when somebody can pop in a Evil Sun's Warbiker and catachant it, like pop it in with a staging ground and catachant it after you've swung and hit you for 6, it's really not that hard to take out a Warlord now, unfortunately. But I mean, obviously, aside from Kotias, he's got the most hit points, and yeah, I mean, he can take a pretty good beating. Also, on his bloodied side, he's still got 6 hit points, so he's pretty beefy.
Sure. Well, any other aspects about Eldorath or the Eldar faction or his signature squad that you feel are particularly compelling or very powerful?
Well, for me, I love the command phase and all the little choices you get to make in order to optimize your moves and get the most card draw and shut down your opponent, that sort of thing. And I think that Eldar with Dark Eldar allies is actually the strongest command deck you can build because it has access to the most number of 2 command icon units and also the cheapest ones between Slith Mercenaries and Biltan Guardians. And then you tack on the fact that Eldorath's ability also helps with command, and it's just all kinds of fun. I just it's good to play tactical, but also if you can go into a fight with twice as many cards and resources as your opponent, you've got a lot more pressure you can put on them and a lot more resources to throw into those battles to make it swing your way.
For sure. I guess just in regard to allied factions, do you typically opt for the Dark Eldar, or do you see much, if any, reason to go with the Tau?
Um, Back a few war packs ago, it was sort of a toss-up. I originally was in with Tau because I really enjoyed being able to use Earthcast technicians to be able to pull not only promotions and ion rifles, but also the Yondan Wraith Guards are drones, so they'll pull them as well.
Right,
But
right.
I found that the more packs came out, the more the meta pushed towards swarm decks, and I've started not playing some of the staple Eldar units like the Yondan Wraith Guards because it's hard to play against the swarm deck when you've got a whole bunch of guys that cost 3 and 4. So I lean towards the cheaper units, and most of those come out of Dark Eldar. So I find that Tau works better with Baharoth because Baharoth can go to a planet and get out of the way of combat, and then use tense negotiations or foretell, and obviously his hawks with an ion rifle are scary, and also overcome some of the problems of them having 0 attack without Baharoth being around. So
Sure. I guess overall, do you feel like there are maybe any specific warlords that Eldorath really excels against? Any matchups that going into them you feel relatively confident?
well, it used to be that anytime there was a Chaos Warlord across the table for me, I was happy because the more resources you sink into a single unit that I can exhaust, the better.
Sure.
But now that the Gleeful Plague Beast is out, man, I don't like looking across the table at Zarather. But I don't know. I know that people say that Ragnar and Kith are really strong against Eldorath, and maybe they're not as prominent in my local meta, but I haven't had too many problems with them, thankfully. As far as Eldorath's best matchup, I I don't really know. I mean, I think that he does pretty well against everything. Like, I've got Eldorath has the answers. It doesn't matter what events you bring to the table. If I can nullify them, they're not happening, right?
Right.
Like back when I played Overpower, I got fed up with there was sort of events and abilities and that sort of thing that people could use against you, and so I built a deck. It's basically a superhero team, and I built a deck where all of my guys in my team had effectively had nullify, And so it didn't matter what new combos came out or what shenanigans you were trying to pull, I had the answer because I could just nullify it, and it was great.
Well, you happen to mention specifically that you haven't had a ton of trouble with Kith or Ragnar. Do you feel like there are any matchups that you go into feeling a little bit of anxiety or concern that you're going to be fighting maybe a bit of an uphill battle?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think that if enough people in my meta played Kith and Ragnar, that I would probably find them to be troublesome. I mean, I've had some tough games against them, and if you look at Paul Steiner's database, it shows like I think Eldorath in the database has a really really terrible win percentage or win ratio against those two warlords. And I mean, Primal Hal when Primal Hal came out, that started to get to be really really kind of scary. It was one thing to have Ragnar show up at a plant with you and do 2 damage, but if you're winning command against him, you've probably got a couple of shields or a single shield that you can just sort of shrug it off. But
Definitely.
now you go to the same planet as him. He plays Primal Howl, and when that first happened to me, I said, "Oh, okay, I'll just nullify that." And I was like, "Wait a minute, then my warlord will be exhausted, and your warlord won't, which means that I will lose command of the planet that I was previously winning, and probably get killed before I get to leave." So, with Primal Howl now, it's you sort of I've started to learn how important it is to have a unique Eldar unit floating around at planet 4 or 5, and that's one of the things I'm looking forward to when we get another one in the Great Devourer pack.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's a bit of a bummer that Spirit Seer Aerithal, at least in the eyes of a lot of players, is a little bit of a lackluster card. So, including him within a deck just by the simple merit that he has that printed unique icon is really a bit of a shame. So, I definitely think some more options can't hurt by any means.
Yeah, I mean, he is pretty bad. I do find in my experiences that when I put him out on the table, people attack him first because they don't want to let him use his reaction or his
Sure.
ability. Um, and if there was some way to make him hardier, then it would actually be pretty decent. But with 3 hit points, it doesn't take very much to take him out.
Sure. Well, I guess, just by the nature of a living card game, we're always going to see more attachments and more supports and events and different things like that. I suppose certainly Empower is something that you could potentially use to keep him around for a little longer, but
Hmm.
such a fleeting, ephemeral effect. I would just personally prefer something much more permanent, but we'll definitely see where the game goes in time.
You could put some Guardian mesh armor on him and see if that actually works. But I wouldn't rely on that.
Yeah, I've never had fantastic luck with an abundance of shield cards in any case playing Eldar. So when you mentioned struggling, oh well, the possibility of struggling against Packmaster Kith, I can only imagine how frustrating it would have been for me anyway to have potentially so many incoming attacks that all prompt you with the opportunity to use shield cards or not. It just seems like it would be very overwhelming pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think that the people that have trouble with Kith usually have trouble because she's choking them. And
Sure.
I find that I just like in my experience that I focus so heavily on command that I don't have trouble with that. Like, Archon's Palace it's an inconvenience, but it's not making it so that I don't have any cards. But the whenever I see Kith, I always know that there's going to be eventually, or most likely, I guess I should say, a showdown involving a Chimera Den. Eventually, there's going to be a time where there's going to be like 4 or 5 chimeras that come over to a planet, and if I can take out those chimeras, then I've probably won the game. And if I can't, that's probably where I lose.
Sure.
I had one time I played in the regional in Laval, and I had a buy from a store championship, and then the first game I got into was against Kith, and it was one of those games where all the first 5 planets were green, and he started off with a turn 1 Siren Ziflex on
Ouch.
planet 1, which was Planum, and then moved it to planet 2. But anyway, so he won the first 2 planets, and then I had to, put up a fight at 1 and, not let him stack up too much at 2 from that point on, pretty much.
Sure.
And one of the turns, I don't remember what happened exactly, but he had like 5 Chimera tokens and Kith and, another unit or two at Planet One, and he basically told me that the game was over. And, using Gift of Isha and Empower and that sort of thing, I was able to pull it out with, I think I had like a Bealtan Guardian, Wild Rider, and Eldorath, and I managed to take them out by Gift of Ishaing them in and that sort of stuff, and they were all empowered. And he seemed a little bit flabbergasted that I was able to pull that off. And then I messed up and went to Planet 2 when Planet 1 was for the win and lost that game, but it's another story for another time. But I
Well,
won the regional, though, so I don't feel too bad about it now.
sure, and it sounds like that was a hell of a series of plays in any case, so
For sure, yeah.
good on you and in any case. But you've touched on some of Eldorath's areas of vulnerabilities, struggling against things like Primal Howl and other things like that. But do you feel like there are any other specific cards that you really dread going up against, or anything like that that's a bit of a counter to Eldorath and his signature squads specifically?
Well, I can touch on a few things. I know I love um, Starbane's councils. I love putting them down and like dare the Warlord to come and come to the planet. If I've got them at like Planet 2 or something like that, because the Warlord will have initiative. They'll probably swing for 2, which I can then take and smack them for 5, right? So they
Sure.
don't even go to the planet, and then the Tempest Blade comes out, and that all goes to shambles because they swing for 3, my guy's dead, and I just wasted a card and 3 resources, which makes me sad.
Right.
Um, so that definitely hurts. Um, Anshi has a lot of counters. Because I play Eldorath with Dark Eldar, I was looking at Anshi's Sanctum. I go to a planet, I go, that guy's exhausted. And then Anshi's Sanctum and readies him up again. And, admittedly, if I was any other Warlord, he would get 2 attacks with that unit, and most
Sure.
likely in the range phase with the Sanctum. So I have, prevented that from happening twice. But as Eldorath, I'm used to preventing from happening at all because I exhaust the thing and then kill it, or something along those lines. And the other thing is that the other main control trick that I have in Eldar, Dark Eldar, is Archon's Terror, right? And so you throw in an on-me prelate, pop an ion rifle on it or something like that, and I Archon's Terror it, and then you go Orbital City and send it right back, and it's ready to go. And it's just like, oh, okay. And again, I guess you don't get to attack for 7 armor bane twice, which is good, but you still can bloody my Warlord, so it doesn't
Right.
make me feel very good about it.
Right. At that point, it doesn't really matter too much.
And then I think still the scariest card for me is probably the Plague Beast, because I mean I generally play a deck that is, most of my units are pretty light on the hit points, because you sort of need to play Swarm in order to counter Swarm. And when you can go into a planet with a bunch of guys that have 2 hit points, and they would all be dead if you don't shield them because of a Plague Beast, it's really tough. And I mean the only answer to a Plague Beast that can stop its ability from going off before, or stop it from wrecking you at a planet, actually would be Inquisitorial Fortress, because you could play that in the action window at the end of the command phase, which it commits, you send it home before the combat phase, and then it doesn't have a trigger. But I mean, that's Imperial Guard is the only one that has that
Sure.
solution, unfortunately.
Right. Well, just really any kind of effect that circumvents your entire exhaustion ability, in that the Plague Beast triggers that damage type effect, whether it's ready, whether it's exhausted.
Yep.
That's just got to be tricky, just because it circumvents your Warlord's greatest strength entirely.
Yeah, and the other thing, I haven't seen too much of him, but I had a bit of trouble with, or I guess it requires a bit of different thinking to play against Baharoth, because typically there's a big battle at Planet One, and they'll have their guys at Planet Two and move them over. So I know a couple of games when I was playing in one of the regionals I was in, there was a few times where I actually had to send Eldorath to Planet Two to exhaust like a Wild Rider squadron or somebody like that, so that I could, when he comes over, he's exhausted,
Sure.
or at least he wouldn't have that swing in the first round of combat. And again, because Eldorath doesn't really contribute much to combat beyond that, it wasn't the end of the world to send him to 2, except, I lose initiative or something along those lines, I guess.
Sure. Well, and I mean you've kind of touched on this a little bit just in regard to your general gameplay strategy. You mentioned definitely playing a command heavy deck, and it sounds like you're just very flexible with where you send your warlord and how you use your warlord, in that he's primarily being used for his reaction as opposed to any kind of combat role whatsoever. But what are some other just general tips for piloting Eldorath, and what are some of your keys to success?
Well, I know people like I think I mentioned it before, but people say that Kith is the choke. Dark Eldar is the choke deck. But I mean, if you build a deck that is strong enough in command, then you're effectively choking your opponent. Maybe you're not discarding cards from their hand, but if they never draw them in the first place, it's just as good.
Sure.
Um, I definitely, I definitely try to take a look at the planet layout and sort of try to get an idea of where I think my opponent's warlord is going to go. I know in a game against Anshi in the regionals, I was able to uh, end up at the same planet as Anshi 3 times and win command against him when he was trying to take a 2-card planet away from me. And there was there was a few rounds where the guy had no cards and was just drawing the 2 from the HQ phase.
Right.
So definitely you've got a lot of control, and Eldorath is definitely all about control. So it's good to be able to flex that muscle, and you need to build the deck to be able to do that.
For sure. And I mean, Anshi is definitely one of those warlords where you at any and all cost want to prevent him from accumulating a bunch of extra cards and resources. So,
Definitely, yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I have yet to have much trouble with Anshi with an Eldorath deck, just because, if he's got no cards. Admittedly, Anshi is scary even when he has no cards because he only needs like 1 or 2 cards to be able to bloody your warlord or kill him. But I mean, if you can choke him out on cards, then he's a lot less likely to get those cards that he needs to do that.
Right. Well, definitely. I mean, the more things you can kind of leverage in your favor, or the fewer tools you can give your opponent to use against you, the better. So, definitely being able to control that, I could see being immensely useful, even if, the odds are maybe not necessarily stacked against you, but
Yep.
certainly Anshi's a formidable warlord. But, you've mentioned some clever tricks and different devious things you have done during some different games, but apart from, say, Starbane's Council that you mentioned earlier, what are some of your favorite Eldar cards, some of your favorite combos and tricks to use against your opponent?
Well, I definitely love Wild Rider squadrons. One of my favorite moves in the game is just deploying a Wild Rider squadron at Planet 2 because it's covering 60% of the board and it is a huge pain in the butt. And if you're not like I've played in games where I've had 2 Wild Riders at Planet 1, and if you go, wow, there's no way I can I can win that planet, so I'm just not going to bother going there, then the Wild Riders just you put a weenie guy with them, and the Wild Riders just move to Planet 2, and then you've got the same problem because as long as you don't force them to have to stay at that planet and fight to win it, then they will always be in your face in Planet 1 going forwards. You have to make your stand and just get them to HQ so that you can do that. Um, the other guys, which oddly enough have the same stats as Wild Riders, is the Warlock Destructors, which are they're so good. I played Eldorath before in the core. He was always my go-to guy, and Warlock Destructors they just change up the game so much. And it sounds silly, but the Eldar kind of had they didn't have a lot of hitting power before Warlock Destructors came out, and it definitely adds to it. And obviously, people think, oh man, I don't want to have to pay a resource to keep them out, but the beauty of it is that you don't have to. If you've got, let's say you've got a Gift of Isha sitting in your hand, you purposely discard the Warlock Destructor, put it on top of your discard pile, and go, okay, cool, I'm all set. Got him ready to go. One in the chamber, and I can bring him in whenever I want to, and help out in a combat. Or, if you have Craft World Gate, I've been playing around with that a lot lately. It's kind of interesting. You get a Warlock Destructor that's got a few damage on him, or you just, he's going to go back to HQ and come in exhausted next turn. You just Craft World Gate him back into your hand and put him out ready to planet for 2 instead of paying 1 to have him sitting at your HQ exhausted or damaged or something like that. Craft World Gate is also fantastic for I can't remember the name of the planet, but the one, if you've got less units than your opponent, you can draw 3 cards or 3 resources. You can have if your opponent's gonna exercise that, and they've got 1 less guy than you, you just go Craft World Gate, put a cheap guy back in your hand, and all of a sudden you deny them the ability to trigger the planet. It also works the other way around. If you're tied, you can pull away one of your guys, and then you've got less guys, and you can exercise it.
Sure. And ultimately see a net gain of resources in that respect.
Sure, yeah. And one of the other guys that I play, it's not an Eldar card specifically, but to help out against Swarm, I've been playing Cyberite Marksman, which are the Dark Eldar 1 cost 2/1 range guy with no command icon.
Right.
And it's kind of neat to Craft World Gate though. Like you put them on a planet, and you do your fight and so on and so forth, and then the next turn you Craft World Gate them back in your hand and put them out at planet 1 again, because they're so cheap that you're basically just paying 1 for another 2/1 ranged attack. They're not going to do much help at your HQ anyway, coming in exhausted and that sort of thing. So
sure,
it can make some early combat threats.
Definitely adds a little bit of pressure for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose you've mentioned some of your regional performances before, but any particularly memorable gameplay experiences or just memories, whether it's a tournament or just casual play, anything really stand out in your mind where all the stars have aligned and Eldorath's really been able to flex his psychic might?
I've had a couple games in tournaments and in my league and that sort of thing where I had like I triple empowered Starbane at one point. I think I had like a Warlock Destructor, 2 Wild Riders, and a Starbane's Council, and then Eldorath.
Dear
and
God.
I was against that's 5 units, and I was against 9 or 10 enemy units, and I triple empowered, and all of a sudden it was just like, when Eldorath is a 4/10,
yeah,
and the Wild Riders are hitting for 6 and have 7 hit points and that sort of stuff, it just changes the game because you don't even need to use shields, right? Obviously, you need to be winning command pretty heavily in order to be able to pull out 9 resources for 3 empowers.
Right.
But that's a bit of a fringe case. I had one game back early on in Octagon, and I don't remember who I was playing against, but I wanted to. It was one of the first tournaments I went to, and I wanted to play test Eldorath a bit before I went, and so I sat down with this guy and I started playing Eldorath against him, and he gave up really easily. Like he wanted to reset the game pretty easily as soon as things took a turn for the worse. But we played 2 games, and then the third game, I did something like playing 2 foresights and a superiority against him on the first turn, and took away 3 planets worth of command against him and won all 5. And he was just like, he swore at me and said, "Okay, I'm done. I don't like Eldorath," and walked away. And I feel bad about it, but I just wanted to see how it would play out like that. And it's really interesting that you can, control the command phase that much.
For sure. That's pretty absurd, those couple games right there. So
Yes.
I can certainly empathize with your opponent, but as somebody who likes playing Eldorath myself, I could definitely see taking some sadistic pleasure in pulling off those combos there.
Well, I mean, everyone's got their combos, right? I've pulled off some ridiculous shenanigans with Kotiaz with a preemptive barrage, or Urian with a Hypex injector on a ranged unit. Anshi with his AoE 6 ranged armor bane and all that sort of stuff. Or I think my opponent had I had Zarather doing. It was 2 Plague Beasts, a Flamer with a Mark of Chaos, a Warp Storm, and 3 Orc Cannons against me. So it was like AoE 9 and then 3 orc cannons afterwards. So it was just,
That's
it's
just
it's
absurd.
crazy what people can do but it takes a lot of outplaying your opponent to be able to get that set up to be able to do that
Almost
for the
definitely.
most part. I mean, some of them not so much. Like Kotiaz with a couple of henchmen and a couple of units with a preemptive barrage can get ridiculous, and that only takes 3 or 4 cards. But regardless,
For sure, there's definitely a lot of interesting possibilities in this game. Compared to my LCG background is pretty steeped in the Lord of the Rings living card game, and something like
hmm
that. There's very much a strict limitation on just in regard to how many attachments you can have on any one character, but even just something so simple as slapping 3 ion rifles on one character can result in some pretty absurd effects. So some of the
sure.
possibilities in Conquest are pretty crazy, even if they take a lot of work and a lot of orchestration to pull off.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the times, something comes out like that, and somebody's just like, man, this is ridiculous. This game, this is broken or something along those lines. But if you look at it, I find that the Conquest is a lot of small choices that lead up to the end result, right? So it might be with your triple ion rifle example, maybe the person just throws all 3 of them in one turn because they were hanging on to them or something.
Sure.
But, he has to get them first. He might need to win command a bunch of times to do it. He may have put it on a unit that you didn't kill because it killed something and went back to HQ and then went to a different planet. You didn't put up resistance against it. So, there's all these sorts of things, right, that add up to it. Like with a Zarather example, sure, he puts in his one plague beast, but you don't go to that planet to try to whittle it down. And then all of a sudden, he's going to Yavaren and putting another one, and then you didn't try to stop him there or,
Right.
anything like that.
Right.
So, if you know that your opponent's going to try something like that, then you need to put up a resistance to be able to stop it from happening. Otherwise, you're going to have that wall of stuff in front of you that's unstoppable.
Sure. Well, I mean, go figure something that takes like 8 cards and 25 resources is difficult to go up against, but
Yeah, and I mean, in that case, it's really scary to see it, but chances are it's probably just a win more situation anyway.
right, right. Or there's probably been at least, more than one thing go wrong before the game got to that point. There was
Yeah,
some
exactly.
plain mistake or missed opportunity somewhere. But
Well, like I've had games where I've ended and I've just been like, man, I did not draw any units. Where were all my units? And then I realized that I was actually losing. I was being choked on cards, and so obviously I didn't draw many units because I didn't draw many cards, right? And so like I've seen games where I played a game where a guy had I was winning command in most places, and just because of the way that the plants were laid out, he ended up with like 23 resources but only had 2 cards because he kept being able to go to the 2 resource planet that lets you steal a resource from your opponent and that sort of stuff because I was focusing on cards against him.
sure.
And so you can have all kinds of resources and no cards, or all kinds of cards and no resources, and actually against Anshi, that the cards and resources thing is usually pretty good because you've got all kinds of shields and that sort of thing. But against Anshi, your events in your hand and your attachments in your hand aren't really shields anyway. They may as well just be 3 cost army units you can't afford to put out.
Right. Well, just on the subject of, some of the things your opponent can do to make you kind of struggle and flounder, for players that maybe aren't so interested in playing Eldorath, but instead might find that their local meta is full of players opting to use our first Eldar Warlord. What are some ways you can try to fight against Eldorath? What are some ways that you can potentially beat him?
Well, I think one of the toughest things that people have, sorry, most trouble people have with Eldorath is trying to figure out how to win command when both of your warlords go to the same planet and you don't have a huge extra number of units, right?
Right.
Like you put down a promotion on somebody and you're like, okay, I'm winning command, and then you realize that when Eldorath comes and he exhausts that unit, all of his command icons are gone and Eldorath wins, right? And the problem with that is that you have to have 2 units that have more command icons than my guys together. Like in a simple example, I have a single command icon, and you've got, a 2 command icon guy, I just exhaust it. If you have 2 single units with a command icon, I exhaust one of them and we tie.
Right.
But if you've got a promoted guy and a non-promoted guy, I can take away 3 of your command icons, leaving you with only 1 by exhausting that guy. So one thing that you can do is, if you're gonna, like, as an Eldorath player, I think most Eldorath players do focus on command a lot. And what you can do is you can promote the guys that are, or in this example, promote a guy that is not a combat threat, because that way I have a tough choice to make. Do I want to win command there, or do I want to exhaust the guy that's going to hurt me, right? If it's a void pirate I'm exhausting, he's not going to hit me very hard because he hits
Sure.
for 0, right? But there might be like an honored librarian there that isn't promoted that I really want to exhaust. So do I want to win command, or do I want to stop 4 damage from coming in? It's put them to the test with choices like that. Um,
Just
El-
giving your opponent as many opportunities to make a mistake as possible.
sure, yeah. I think that against Eldorath, I want to say you have to play a strong command game, because at least from my experiences, Eldorath I play him strong in command, and his reaction lends himself to being strong in command and supplementing that. But there are times where you can win command on 4 planets around, but still lose the game because the planets happen to be, like if I draw all my command units and the planets happen to line up for the first 3 planets, so I'll have red icons or something like that, and you just go all in for planet 1 and planet 2 and put the pressure on me. Yeah, sure, I've got, I might have 6 more cards than you and 5 more resources, but if all you need to do is win 1 more planet, um, it's a lot of work for me to have to prevent you from, stop you from winning planet 1, but also put up enough of a resistance at planet 2 that you can't just shove all your guys at 2 on the commitment, and make me be in trouble the next round, right?
Right? Well, I suppose any final thoughts or suggestions for either playing as Eldorath or playing against him?
Well, I know that universally I think that Eldorath's weakness is against Swarm, because they don't really have any area effect. They can pull like the AoE 1 guy from Dark Eldar, but I don't think I've actually seen anybody do that. So I mean, if you want to give Eldorath trouble, the more small bodies you got, the better, right? Because like if you've got 2 big guys that have a total of 5 command icons, I can exhaust one of them and get rid of 3 command icons. But if you've got 4 little guys with 1 command icon each, then I can only remove one of those command icons
For
and
sure.
one of the swings from an attack, which might only be 1 or 2 damage. So it definitely helps. And I mean, the meta's already there telling everybody that they should play swarm decks anyway, because of the way the game works, right? Like if you've got an elite unit with 4 command icons, that's great. But the thing is, I would rather have 4 small units with 1 command icon that I can put on 4 different planets. And then you've got all your answers to big units like Eldorath exhausting them, or Archon's Terror, or whatever there happens to be. Um, but it's interesting that the thing I've noticed in a lot of the previews for the second cycle and that sort of thing is all of the crowd control cards going forwards say non-elite,
Right.
but Archon's Terror and Eldorath's Reaction don't. So they're always going to be useful in that regard, which is interesting, I suppose.
Definitely. I suppose maybe at some point in the future, once we start to get into card rotation and everything like that, I'll be curious to see if we end up conserving some of our same warlords, or if they ended up being printed slightly differently. Like if the designers eventually tack on a non-elite or non-unique qualifier to Eldorath or similar effects. But kind of just like we were talking about earlier, the more targets there are for you to exhaust, the less benefit you get from triggering that effect, the more incoming enemy attacks, the more shield cards you have to spend. It seems like Eldar units, kind of as a general rule of thumb, are a little bit expensive relative
Hmm.
to some other cards, and just like you mentioned, without being able to, deal out multiple attacks, it must be pretty difficult indeed to fight off a horde of low cost, but nevertheless together strong enemy units. But any other thoughts? Any other little tips for ways to exploit or counter Eldorath, or any other little strategic nuggets you want to throw out there?
Hmm. Well, one is when you're playing against Eldorath and you're worried about Gift of Isha. I've been burned a few times where I was hoping to Gift of Isha, like the enemy warlord. I was waiting for them to go to a planet other than Planet One, because I had a bunch of guys there or something along those lines, to go to a planet, swing at my command unit, and then I was going to Gift of Isha like a Starbane's Council or something in,
Right.
and bloody the warlord. I remember one time the command unit that they went in to swing against was a Beal-10 Guardian, and then I realized after they swung that the Beal-10 Guardian was on top of my deck, and I was no longer going to be able to Gift of Isha the Starbane's Council in, and that made my stomach sink the first time it happened to me. So definitely, whenever you're playing against Eldar, I guess in general, always keep an eye on what Eldar unit they've got on top of their deck, and if you can't see, ask them
Right.
frequently if you want to, because the more the Eldar player is aware that you may have a Gift of Isha in your hand, and that you know it, the more hesitant they will be. Like it's a combat trick, right? But if you know it's coming, and you know exactly what is going to come in when it comes, you're better prepared for being able to combat it.
Definitely. I very much take things from the perspective of the whole knowledge is power
Exactly.
thing. Just because, like you mentioned, everybody's discard pile is supposed to be public knowledge. So
Hmm.
it might be uncomfortable to ask your opponent to let you take a peek, but it's definitely well within your right, too.
Sure.
So,
Well, and also you can go through your opponent's discard pile and see how many Gift of Ishas they've played or that sort of thing. Um,
exactly.
I had a game where I had actually it was I was playing against Kato, and I actually had three nullifies in my hand, and I can't remember the entire circumstances, but it was basically Kato and a tactical squad Cardenas, and I think I had like a Wraith Guard that had one damage on it, and another unit that only had one hit point. So I discarded two nullifies to block AoE one damage, and then attacked back with my Wraith Guard on Kato, and they played Indomitable, and my opponent was like, "There's no way you have that third nullify," and I did, and I nullified the Indomitable and bloody Kato, and they were just like, "Ah." But if you already see that there are, obviously that's a bit of a fringe case, but if you
Sure.
if you see that there are two nullifies in your opponent's deck or two Gift of Ishas in your opponent's deck, chances are they've got three of them in their deck, but statistically that third one may not be in their hand depending on how much of a draw pile they've got left.
Sure.
Um, One other thing I can mention, I guess, with Eldorath is because his reaction happens before combat. You can, like, a lot of people will go, okay, I need to send my warlord to this planet because he needs to participate in the battle and that sort of thing. But I find with Eldorath, it's nice to have the 1/7 body around if it's a prolonged battle and it's, a really important one. But there are times when you can just send in Planet 1, exhaust that unit, foresight him away, and go do something else. Exercise a battle ability over here or something like that. Because, oftentimes, especially when you got foresight in hand, you have the flexibility of being able to commit wherever you want, take a look at what your opponent has done, reevaluate the situation, and then decide whether or not you want to move at all. Um, and like if your opponent doesn't go to Planet One, you exhaust that dangerous combat unit. You're probably going to win command because one of his units is exhausted, and then you can still leave, and you can go, like exhaust a command unit of theirs, kill it, and exercise a battle ability or something like that. And it's really the flexibility in that and control in that is really nice. Superiority helps with that as well, but I don't think I've played that in a long, long time because it's just there's so many good Eldar cards, especially now that the entire Warlord cycle is out. I just can't find room for it because I mean the argument people usually use is superiority versus promotion. Do you want to win You have the superior is a surprise that you surprise your opponent and win command that one round, but then it reverts back to, maybe them having more command icons than you at a planet.
Sure.
Versus here's a promotion, it's on that unit, I'm winning command at that planet from now until you do something about it. And you force them to actually have to go there or put more units at the planet or whatever it is. And it's just, I love promotions. They're the best thing ever. My friends in the Toronto meta call me the promotion lord apparently, because I've always been an advocate of putting 3 promotions in your deck.
Well, before we close things down, I just a thought popped in my mind. What are your thoughts on the Eldar Survivalist?
Well, originally I played them. There was a time when, um, about halfway through the cycle when I was playing Eldorath with Tau. That was my deck of choice. I had the Wraith Guards and the Eldar Survivalists and that sort of thing, and they're good. They're definitely. It's easy to overwhelm your opponent with Void Pirates and Survivalists and that sort of thing. But I don't play them anymore because they're also very easy to override. Like, if I'm paying 2 for a command unit, it probably has 2 command icons.
Right.
And yes, the argument is always, well, you put a survivalist out and then they just send their warlord there and stop you. But my argument when I was playing them, and I think it's still valid to this point, this day is that if my two resources and a card have caused your warlord to go to planet 4 instead of participating in battle at planet 1 or planet 2, then I think that was a very good use of 2 resources and a card.
Sure.
So I think it's sort of a win-win in that case. But if you get like a sanctioned psyker out against the survivalist, then it's just unfortunate.
Sure.
Like most of the time when I play, if I'm putting a 2 resource unit out, he's got 2 command icons, and it would tie those guys as opposed to be losing to them.
Right.
So
It's definitely a little bit steep for an initial investment, and if you're not intending to use it maybe as some form of bait or something like that, there's just so many units nowadays where you can get a command icon for potentially less than 2.
I mean, it also helps, like you said, as being bait, because if first of all, if you put them out late in the deploy phase, then your opponent is probably, typically I find people put command units out first because they don't want to, quote unquote, show their hand as to where they're planning on going, whether they're, putting a bunch of big units at planet 1 or planet 2 or something like that, right? Because they want to see where you're putting your combat units, and then ideally get that information and then deploy after you. But also, the great thing about Eldorath is that if you want to make sure that you're going to win command at the planet with the survivalist, you just go there. Even if they send their warlord there, like say it's a survivalist versus a void pirate. If they send their warlord there, you've exhausted the void pirate and you win anyway. And if they don't send their warlord there, then you kill the void pirate and you've got your survivalist uncontested next turn. So they're very powerful. And I mean, I've seen games where my opponent or I have had 3 survivalists out at one time, and it's just ridiculous how many cards and resources you can pull out of a command phase like that, because you still have to cater to planet 1. You can't shut down all 3 of them necessarily with just your warlord. So if you don't have the units to take out counter the command icons, it can get really ugly really fast.
Definitely. Well, I suppose before we wrap things up, any final thoughts, any more advice you'd like to share with our community?
I think I covered everything.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, John. I suppose just as a way of closing, do you want to plug one more time where people might be able to find you or interact with you?
Well, I'm on Facebook in pretty much every Conquest group that's there that isn't specific to a city. I'm an admin of I think they call it the 40K Conquest LCG General Group, and the one that doesn't say General that Anthony Dulac was the founder of. And I'm certainly in the competitive one, but not an admin of that one. I don't play on Octagon much, but if I do, my screen name is Wig, Wigg. and I'm now part of joined the Skype chat group as well. So I'm around.
Sounds good. And for anybody listening to this video, I'll be sure to include links to those in the video description below, but I suppose we should call it good there. So, thank you once again for your time, John, and
No problem.
best of luck winning any and all upcoming tournaments.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel if you have not done so already. Please leave a comment letting me know what your thoughts were regarding this interview and your own thoughts, opinions, and advice regarding Eldorath Starbane. Are there any questions you'd like me to ask John that I didn't manage to get to in this video, or do you simply want to share your own perspective regarding the very first of our Eldar Warlords? Be sure to let me know in the comments section. But in any case, and as always, thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you again soon.